My name is Annette Brown. I'm 31 years old. At our Memorial Day cookout, my sister slid a document across the picnic table and told me to sign away my half of Grandma's lake house. In front of 50 people who all turned to look at me. Then my mother stood up and said, in front of every single one of them, "She deserves it more than you." My sister cried on cue. The whole table waited. I picked up the pen. Then I put it down, walked outside, and made one phone call. 3 weeks later, an attorney showed up at my sister's door and asked for her by name. She turned pale immediately. She thought she had won. She forgot one thing. If you've ever been the person in your family who gives everything quietly while someone else takes the credit loudly, stay with me. This one is for you. The first time my mother called me selfish, I was 9 years old. I didn't have a word for what was happening. I just knew that my bedroom had a window that faced the backyard, and that I liked watching the light change in the afternoon. And that one Tuesday in October, my mother came in and told me I needed to give Sloane the room because Sloane needed more space. Sloane was 14. She'd decided she needed a bigger desk for her homework. My room was slightly larger. That was the entire argument. I said I didn't want to switch. My mother looked at me the way she always looked at me when I disappointed her. Not angry exactly, just tired. Like I was a math problem she'd already solved, and I kept coming up with the wrong answer. "You're so selfish, Annette. Your sister needs this more than you do." I remember standing in the doorway holding my pillow. I remember watching Sloane carry her desk lamp into my room, like she was moving into a space that had always belonged to her. I don't remember crying. What I remember is that I didn't cry, and that somewhere in that moment, not crying became a habit. My mother loved Sloane the way some women love the child who needs them most. Sloane needed things loudly and often. Attention, reassurance, money, rescue. I learned early that needing things quietly was the same as not needing them at all. So I stopped asking. I started managing. I got a scholarship to Sacramento State that my mother mentioned once, briefly, at a dinner where most of the conversation was about Sloane's new apartment. I bought my first car with money I'd saved from 2 part-time jobs, while Sloane got a Nissan for her 21st birthday. I graduated, got a job in logistics operations, built a life that worked. And my mother looked at all of it and said more than once, "Annette's always fine. She doesn't need us the way Sloane does." She meant it as a compliment. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. The family absorbed the narrative the way families do, gradually, then completely. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I was the independent one, the practical one, the one who does her own thing. My Aunt Patricia said it to me at Christmas once, with a warm smile. "You've always been so self-sufficient, Annette. It's admirable, really." She had no idea she was describing a wound. Only one person never used that word about me. Not once, in 31 years. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, had lived in a wood-frame house on the north shore of Lake Tahoe since before my mother was born. Green shutters, a dock that jutted 20 feet over the water, a kitchen that smelled like ginger and old pine. The 3rd floorboard from the top of the stairs creaked no matter where you stepped. In summer, the lake turned a color that doesn't have a name, somewhere between gray and green and the inside of something alive. She took me there alone for the first time when I was 7. Just the 2 of us, a weekend in early June. We sat on the dock in the mornings with fishing rods we had no real intention of using, and she talked to me like I was a person, which sounds like a small thing, but wasn't. On the last morning of that trip, she looked out at the water and said, "This house knows the truth about people." I was 7. I nodded like I understood. She turned and looked at me, really looked, the way she always did, like she was reading something the rest of the world had agreed to ignore, and said, "You're the one who stays, Annette." I thought she was talking about fishing. She was not talking about fishing. I didn't understand what she meant until I was 28 years old and standing in her kitchen watching her struggle to open a prescription bottle, with hands that had started to shake. She'd been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition 18 months earlier. Not immediately dangerous, her cardiologist said, but it would become more difficult over time, and she would need help. Sloane called when she heard the diagnosis. She said all the right things. She posted a photo of herself and my grandmother on Instagram with the caption "Family Time, cherish every moment," and got 412 likes. Then she went back to her life. I started driving up every weekend, 2 hours each way, every Friday evening or early Saturday morning for 3 years. I organized her medications into a pill case with the days of the week on it. I drove her to cardiology appointments and sat in waiting rooms with a book I never actually read. I fixed the heating unit when it broke in February. I restocked her pantry. I labeled her insurance documents in a binder with color-coded tabs. I learned what she could and couldn't eat, what position she needed to sleep in when her legs swelled, which neighbor could be trusted with a spare key. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I wanted a record, but because the medical bills required it, and because organization was the only thing that gave me any sense of control over what was happening to her. Sloane came 3 times in 3 years. Each time she brought flowers and took pictures. Each time she left, my grandmother would watch her go and say nothing, and I would say nothing, and we would both understand something we didn't put into words. That was the only time she ever came without calling first. In the second year, the bills got harder. My grandmother's insurance covered most of her treatment, but there was a gap. An 11-week cardiac rehabilitation program her insurer classified as elective, which was a word that meant they had decided her quality of life was optional. The out-of-pocket total, combined with the medical equipment she needed and the modifications to the house, a grab bar in the shower, a ramp over the back step, a visiting nurse twice a week, came to $47,000. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with that number. I wasn't wealthy. I had a decent salary, modest savings, a small retirement account I'd been building carefully. $47,000 was not nothing. It was, in fact, almost everything I had. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about calling Sloane. I did the math on how that conversation would go, and then I closed my laptop and transferred the money from my savings account. The balance afterward was $3,200. I took a screenshot of the transfer confirmation. I didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Some quiet part of me that understood, without being able to say it clearly, that receipts would matter someday. When I drove up that weekend, I told my grandmother what I'd done. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We need to do this properly." She called Carter Aldridge herself. He'd been her attorney for 20 years, handled her estate planning, knew her wishes, knew the house and everything attached to it. He came to Tahoe the following week with a notary. They drafted a promissory note, $47,000, Annette Brown as creditor, the debt to be treated as a priority claim against Eleanor Whitfield's estate in the event of her death prior to repayment. She signed it. I signed it. The notary stamped it. Carter kept a copy. I drove home with the original in a craft envelope with my grandmother's handwriting on the outside. "Annette, keep this safe." I put it in the fireproof box in my closet and didn't tell anyone. My grandmother asked me not to. She said, "If Sloane knows, your mother will know. And if your mother knows, it becomes a conversation. And I'm too tired for that conversation." I understood completely. I have always understood her silences better than most people's words. That same year, she said something else. Something I didn't fully hear until much later. We were sitting on the dock in the early evening, the lake going flat and gold, and she said, "I've taken care of everything, Annette. You won't have to fight. But if they push, you'll know what to do." I thought she meant the medical paperwork. She was not talking about the medical paperwork. The last month was fast and slow at the same time. She weakened quickly in December, and I took 3 weeks of unpaid leave to stay with her. My mother came twice, 4 hours each visit, then back to the city. Sloane sent flowers and a card that said "thinking of you," which was a strange thing to write to someone who was dying, as though the problem were one of insufficient thought. She passed on a Tuesday morning in January. I was the only one in the room. I held her hand. I didn't cry then. I was too focused on being present in a way the moment deserved. I cried later, in my car, in the hospital parking lot, for 40 minutes, alone, with the engine running because it was cold and I couldn't make myself start driving. 3 days after she died, Sloane called me. She didn't ask how I was. The first thing she said was, "We need to talk about the house." The estate entered probate. Carter Aldridge contacted me as one of the beneficiaries. The will divided the lake house equally, 50% to Annette, 50% to Sloane. The property valued at approximately $80,000. This was not a surprise. My grandmother had told me the terms years ago. What was a surprise was what Carter said next. He said it carefully, the way lawyers do when they know something you don't yet. There are some encumbrances on the property we need to address. I'd like to meet in person. I didn't know what that meant. I wrote it down on a notepad and stared at it. Encumbrances. Before I could find out, Sloan started making calls. I know this because Nora told me. Nora is my closest friend. We've known each other since college, and she moves through the world with a social permeability that means she hears things. She called me on a Wednesday evening and said carefully, "I think you need to know something. I ran into your cousin at the coffee place on J Street. She was on the phone with your Aunt Patricia. Sloan has been calling around. She's telling people you barely visited Eleanor, that you don't have an emotional connection to the house, that the practical thing would be for you to take a buyout and let her have it." "How much of a buyout?" I asked. $15,000. $15,000. For half of an $80,000 property. For 3 years. For $47,000 out of my own savings. For every Friday evening and every Saturday morning and every prescription bottle and every cardiology waiting room. I didn't say anything to Sloan. I didn't call my mother. I opened the fireproof box, looked at the craft envelope, and called Carter Aldridge. He told me what he'd found, 14 months before my grandmother died, when she had already been sick for over a year, when she was already weakening. A lien had been recorded against the Tahoe property at El Dorado County, $61,000. The creditor was a private lending company. The authorization paperwork bore the name Eleanor Whitfield. Carter had flagged it during routine title review. He had compared that signature against my grandmother's signature on her will, her medical directives, her property tax filings going back 11 years. He had retained a forensic document examiner. He placed the title report on his desk and set his pen on one specific line. "This one," he said. The signature was inconsistent at 7 distinct points. The examiner had marked each one individually. I looked at the document. I thought about 14 months ago. I thought about Sloan's visit that fall. The only time in 3 years she had come to Tahoe without calling first, without announcing it, without flowers and an Instagram caption. 3 days she'd stayed, alone with my grandmother. When I'd asked my grandmother about it afterward, she'd said only, "She came to check on the house," in the tone I recognized as the one she used when she didn't want to say the thing she was actually thinking. I understood now what she had been thinking. I told Carter about the visit. He listened without expression. He told me the lien documentation was being submitted for formal analysis. He would be reaching out to all relevant parties through proper legal channels. Then he said, "I'd also like to formally file the promissory note as a priority estate debt, with your permission." I said yes. I drove home. I sat in my apartment in the dark. I thought about $61,000. Where it comes from, where it goes, what kind of thinking produces it. I didn't know yet exactly what Sloan had done with the money, but I understood for the first time why she needed the estate closed quickly, why she needed me to sign something and walk away. She wasn't just being greedy, she was panicking. Memorial Day was 3 weeks away. If you've ever sat across from someone who was certain you'd fold, and you knew something they didn't, you understand exactly what the next 3 weeks felt like. "Stay with me." Nora told me not to go. "You know what's going to happen," she said. We were on the phone. It was 11 at night. She was eating cereal. "They've been setting this up for weeks. Everyone will be there." "I know," I said. "Then why are you going?" I thought about my grandmother at every one of these Memorial Day cookouts, sitting in the same folding chair near the rose bushes, eating 1 hot dog and 2 spoonfuls of potato salad, watching all of us with that particular expression she had, the one that said she understood exactly what was happening in every conversation in the yard, simultaneously. This would be the first one without her. "Because she always went," I said. I wore the blue linen dress she had mailed me the previous spring from a consignment shop in Truckee, with a note that said, "This is your color, trust me." It was my color. I had always trusted her. The cookout was at Aunt Patricia's house in Elk Grove, the same backyard we had been coming to for 23 years. Lawn chairs in clusters, a long folding table with a vinyl tablecloth, the smell of charcoal and sunscreen, children running with water guns across the grass. 53 people who had known me my entire life. When I walked in, Sloan and my mother were standing together near the far fence. They stopped talking the moment they saw me. Something passed between them. Brief, communicative, the kind of look that happens so fast you might convince yourself you imagined it. I didn't imagine it. I got a plate of food. I talked to people. I watched Sloan carry a small canvas bag with her everywhere she went. To the drink cooler, to the chip table, back to her chair. She never set it down. She held it close, the way you hold something valuable, or the way you hold something you don't want anyone else to open. Around 4 in the afternoon, Aunt Patricia suggested everyone move to the large picnic table in the backyard. It was framed as a casual idea. It was not a casual idea. 53 people arranged themselves around the table. My mother sat immediately to Sloane's left. I sat across from them, alone on my side of the bench. The table was old wood, familiar the way things are familiar when you've touched them your whole life. Paint scuffed at the corners, surface rough under your palms. I put both hands flat on it and felt the grain. Sloan reached into the canvas bag. She pulled out a stack of papers, clean, uniform, printed on white stock, and placed them on the table in front of me with the careful deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed this exact motion. On top was a page with an arrow sticker pointing to a signature line. The footer at the bottom bore a law firm name and a California bar number. Someone had paid to have this drafted. Probably weeks ago, probably before she made a single one of those calls to the relatives. "I know this isn't how anyone wants to spend a holiday," she said, in the warm and reasonable voice of someone doing everyone a favor. "But we've been dealing with the estate for months, and I think the simplest thing is to get this resolved so we can all move on. This is a disclaimer of interest. You sign it, you receive $15,000, I handle the rest of the probate, and we're finished." Before I could say a single word, my mother stood up. Judith Brown is 57 years old. She is not a cruel woman. I want to be precise about that. She genuinely believes she is fair, practical, and loving. She has built an entire internal world in which every choice she has made is reasonable. And in that world, what she said next made complete sense. She looked around the table, at all 53 of us. And she spoke in the even, explanatory tone she uses when she is describing something that should be obvious to everyone. We all know how things have been. Sloan has always been close to Eleanor. She's the one who showed up, who maintained that relationship, who cared about that house the way Eleanor cared about it. Annette has her own life. She's always done her own thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it means something different to Sloan. It always has. She paused. She deserves it more than you. 53 faces. Some nodded slowly, in the way people nod when they want a signal agreement without committing to anything out loud. My 12-year-old cousin looked down at her plate. A male cousin I barely knew said, to no one in particular, "Family first, right?" Sloan, on cue, began to cry. Not loudly, precisely. A hand rising to cover her mouth, eyes going bright. The specific performance of grief she had perfected over decades, because it worked every time, in every room, with every audience. Aunt Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. "It's just a house, honey. Nobody asked what I had done. Nobody asked what I had given. Nobody asked what my grandmother had wanted. They just looked at me with the patient certainty of people who have already decided on the answer and are waiting for you to arrive at it." I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen Sloan had placed beside them. Cap already off, ready. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with the expression of someone who expects, on some fundamental level, to get what she wants. I looked at Sloan, whose tears had not actually fallen, and I saw it, all of it, in one clear moment. The way you finally see something when you stop trying not to, the calls to the relatives, the canvas bag kept close all afternoon, the disclaimer drafted by an actual attorney, the cap already off the pen, the table arrangement, my mother standing up to speak before I'd said a word. They had planned this, all of it, and they had planned it because there was something they needed closed before something else opened. I picked up the pen. The table went completely still. I held it for exactly 1 second. Then I set it down. "I need to make a phone call," I said. I said it in my normal voice, the voice I use when I'm confirming a delivery time or checking in on a shipment. Flat, unremarkable, calm. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped against the patio stone, a short, final sound. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked toward the back fence. "Annette," Sloane said behind me. I didn't turn around. I walked through the gate to the narrow strip of grass between the fence and the alley. The sounds of the party were still audible. A child laughing, someone calling for more ice. And I stood in that ordinary outside space and opened my contacts and found the name I had saved 3 months earlier. Carter Aldridge / Whitfield Estate. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "They've handed me a disclaimer of interest at a family cookout, drafted by a law office. They're asking me to sign today." A brief silence. Then, "Do not sign anything. Not today, not this week." I didn't. Good. A shorter pause. I've received the results of the handwriting analysis. I'll be reaching out to all relevant parties through proper channels within the next 3 weeks. You don't need to do anything except wait. "What does reaching out to relevant parties mean?" he said. "It means I'll take it from here." I stood in the alley for a moment after we hung up. The light was going orange over the rooftops. I thought about the craft envelope in my fireproof box. I thought about the word encumbrances on a notepad on my kitchen counter. Then I went back through the gate, got another serving of potato salad, and sat back down at the table. "Are you going to sign?" my mother asked. I looked at her. "I'll think about it," I said. It was the first thing I had ever told them that felt, in its own way, like the truth. Because I had thought about it. I had thought about it for months, and I had already decided. Sloane called me 11 times over the next 3 weeks. I answered every time. I listened. I said things like, "I understand," and "I'll consider it," and "Let me think about that." I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I gave her nothing to work with except the absence of a yes, which is a different thing from a no. The first calls were persuasive. She talked about closure, about family, about how drawn-out probate was exhausting for everyone. The calls in the middle grew more pressured. She mentioned once that she could contest the estate and tie things up for years. The last 2 calls were different. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Not anger, but something beneath it. Something that moves like fear and sounds like urgency. On the 11th call, she asked, "Have you been talking to the attorney?" I said, "Good night, Sloane." On the 17th day, Carter called me. The forensic handwriting analysis was complete. 7 points of inconsistency. The examiner's conclusion, the signature on the lien authorization document was not written by Eleanor Whitfield. The probability of independent replication at all 7 points was, in the examiner's language, statistically negligible. Carter filed the findings with the probate court. He simultaneously submitted the promissory note as a formal priority estate debt, and walked me through the implications with the patience of someone who has explained this before. Estate debt is paid before distribution. That is not optional. It is the legal order of operations. My $47,000 came off the top before the estate was divided. What remained would be split according to the will. But there was also the lien, $61,000 of fraudulent debt attached to the property, which the estate would be required to address before any distribution could proceed. Carter walked me through the numbers. I wrote them in a column on a notepad. "After the promissory note is satisfied," he said, "and after the lien is addressed as an estate liability, Sloane's portion of the estate would be insufficient to cover the debt attributed to it." I put my pen down. "Meaning she gets nothing," I said. "Meaning the math doesn't leave her anything," he said, which is a lawyer's way of saying yes. He also told me in the same level tone that the forged signature had been referred to the district attorney's office. This was not something I had requested. It was something he was obligated to do. I looked out his office window. Sacramento in the afternoon. Flat light, ordinary sky. I thought about $61,000 moving from a private lender into Sloane's account while my grandmother was alive and failing. While I was driving up every weekend. While Sloane was posting photos of 3 visits in 3 years. I found out later, through the kind of information that moves through families whether you want it to or not, that the money had gone to credit card debt, a deposit on a new apartment, and a trip to Portugal she'd taken the previous spring with a caption that said, "Needed this." She needed it. My grandmother was alive when Sloane decided she needed it. Carter had scheduled the formal notification for Thursday morning. I wasn't there. What I know came from 2 sources. Carter's summary, delivered with the precision of a man who selects every word. And from Donna, Eleanor's neighbor for 19 years, a retired schoolteacher who had apparently no particular qualms about what she observed through her screen door. Donna called me about a month after everything settled. She said, "I don't know if you want to know this, but I was watering my front beds when the man in the gray suit came to your sister's door." I said I wanted to know. Carter knocked. Sloan answered. Sloan. He introduced himself, gave her his card, handed her a large envelope. Donna watched Sloan stand there reading, not quickly, not casually, with the focused stillness of someone whose world is reorganizing itself around the information in her hands. Then Sloan looked up and said, "How did you find out?" Not "what is this?" Not "there must be some mistake." The first words out of her mouth were a question that only makes sense if you already know the answer to every other question. Carter placed a second envelope on top of the first. Thicker, Donna said, by quite a bit, and said, "Ms. Brown, I'd recommend you contact your own attorney before we speak further." Then he left. When my mother called me that night, she was not angry. She was something I had almost never heard from her before. She was uncertain. "Annette." Her voice was quieter than usual. "Is it true? Did she sign Mom's name? While Mom was still—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Talk to Sloan," I said. "I'm asking you." "I know." A pause. "I'm asking you to talk to her." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I didn't know she did that. I want you to know I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "And I did know. My mother is many things, but she is not that." "Mom," I stopped. Then, "When is the last time you asked how I was doing?" "During the 3 years I was going up there every weekend." She didn't answer right away. "I thought you were fine," she said finally. "You always seemed fine." There it was. You were always fine. As though fine were a fixed state, rather than a sustained performance. As though my competence had released her from the obligation to look. As though the sentence meant anything other than, "I didn't have to worry about you, so I didn't." I sat with the phone against my ear in a room that had gone dark without my noticing, and I felt something shift, not break, not snap, but settle. Like something held at tension for a very long time had finally been put down. "I'll talk to you soon, Mom," I said. I put the phone down. I looked at the craft envelope on my coffee table. I'd taken it out of the fireproof box the day before and hadn't put it back. Carter had given me a second envelope at the end of our last meeting, smaller, cream-colored, sealed, and told me Eleanor had left it with instructions to deliver it once the estate was resolved. I opened it. 3 pages, handwritten, Eleanor's script, the letters slightly larger than they used to be, the pen pressed harder, the way you write when your hands are working against you and you need each word to hold. She had written it 2 years ago, she said at the top of the first page. While she still could. She wrote that she knew what Sloan would do. She had watched the pattern for decades and understood it the way you understand weather. Not as a moral judgment, but as a predictable system. She had tried to protect me without putting me in the middle of it, because I had been in the middle of it long enough. She wrote, "I couldn't fight your battles for you, but I could make sure the truth was already in the room when it mattered." She wrote, "Carter knows everything. He will handle it correctly. Trust him." And then, near the end of the second page, in letters pressed slightly harder than the rest, "You are not selfish, Annette. I need you to read that sentence until you believe it. You are the one who stays when staying costs something. Don't let them take that from you, too." The last line of the letter was this: "The house knows the truth about people. So do you." I held those pages for a long time. I had been 7 years old the first time she said that to me. On a dock in early June, with a fishing rod, neither of us was really using. I had spent 24 years thinking she was talking about a house. She had always been talking about me. The estate closed in late summer. The promissory note was satisfied first. $47,000 returned to me from the estate before any distribution. The lien was addressed as an estate liability. After the accounting, Sloan's portion was insufficient to cover the debt attributed to it. She received nothing. The DA's review was ongoing. I didn't follow it closely. That was not my work to do. The lake house was mine, fully, outright in the end. Once Sloan's share was absorbed by the debt she had created. I hadn't planned on that outcome exactly. I sat with it for a while. The way you sit with something that belongs to you, but still carries the shape of someone else. Before I went back to Tahoe, I met my mother for coffee. I chose the time and the place. I arrived first. I sat in the chair that faced the door and ordered my coffee before she got there, which was something I had never done before in 31 years of accommodating her schedule, her preferences, her comfort. She came in looking tired in a new way, not the tired of too many obligations, but the tired of someone who has been required to revise something they were very sure of. I let her sit. I let her order. I didn't fill the silence the way I always had, managing everyone's discomfort so they didn't have to sit in it. I let her sit in it. Then I said, I'm not going to cut you off. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. What I need from you, what I'm asking for, is that you stop assuming I'm fine. I need you to ask, even when I seem fine, especially then. She looked at her coffee cup. I drove up there every weekend for 3 years, I said, keeping my voice even. I paid $47,000 out of my own savings. I was the only person in the room when she died. And the story everyone was telling was that I was the selfish one. She looked up. I know, she said quietly. I know that now. You knew before, I said. You just didn't look. She didn't argue. That was something. Not enough, not close to enough, but something. The beginning, maybe, of a longer accounting I was no longer responsible for managing on her behalf. She said she was sorry. She said it simply, without ceremony. I believed she meant it. I also knew it didn't fix anything. I accepted both of those things at the same time, because that is what adult grief looks like when it's honest. I drove up to Tahoe on a Saturday in October, alone, through the mountains, windows cracked, radio off. The house was exactly as I'd left it the last time I'd been there with her. Her reading glasses on the side table, a half-finished crossword on the kitchen counter, the throw blanket folded over the arm of her chair. I didn't change anything that day. I just walked through the rooms. Then I went out to the dock. The lake was doing what it does in autumn, going still and flat. The sky folded into the water so you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I sat down in the same spot where we'd sat when I was 7, and I put my hand on the third plank from the end, which had a slight depression in it, the place where she used to set down her tackle box every time. It was still there. Of course it was still there. There's something nobody tells you about winning. They tell you about the fight. They tell you about the moment it turns. The attorney at the door, the documents, the look on someone's face when they realize the thing they thought was theirs was never going to be theirs. Those parts have a shape. You can follow them. What nobody tells you about is the Tuesday morning 3 weeks after everything settles. When you wake up at 6:15 and reach for your phone out of habit and think, for exactly 2 seconds, that you should call her to check if she took her medication. And then you remember, and then you lie there in the gray early light and understand that winning and losing can occupy the same moment, the same breath, the same 2 seconds of forgetting before the remembering comes back. I won. I know I won. I'm not confused about that. But Eleanor Whitfield is still gone, and no promissory note, and no forensic document examiner, and no district attorney's review can do anything about that particular fact. The lake house is mine. The receipts spoke for themselves. And I still reach for the phone on Tuesday mornings. That is not a complaint. It's just the part of the story that doesn't fit into anything neat. The weeks after the estate closed had a strange quality to them, like the silence after a loud noise, when you're not sure if the quiet is peace or just the absence of sound. I went back to work. I answered emails. I did my job well, which has always been a reliable thing to return to when the rest of life becomes unreliable. My coworker Dana asked me once how I always seemed so calm under pressure. I thought about that question longer than she probably expected before I said, practice. Nora took me to dinner the week after everything closed. The Thai place we'd been going to since college, the kind of restaurant that hasn't changed its menu in 15 years and is better for it. She ordered for both of us without asking, because she's known my order for a decade. And she waited until we were halfway through the food before she said anything real. How are you actually doing, she said. Statement, not question. I thought about it. I keep coming back to the same thing, I said. Not the money, not even what she was going to do to my claim. Just, Grandma was still there. She was still going to the window to watch the birds. She still had her crossword on the counter. And Sloane sat across from her at that kitchen table and then drove to a lending office and wrote her name on a piece of paper. Nora put her fork down. I think Grandma knew something, I said. Not the specifics, but something. I think that's part of why she wanted me there so often. Not just for the help. I think she wanted a witness, someone who was actually present. She needed someone to see what was real, Nora said. Yeah. We sat with that while the restaurant moved around us. Other people's ordinary evenings, other tables, other conversations. Do you feel like it's over? She asked. I thought about Tuesday mornings. I thought about the reading glasses still on the side table. I thought about my mother's voice saying you were always fine in a tone meant to be reassuring. That was instead the most precise description of the problem I'd ever heard. The legal part is over, I said. Nora nodded. The other parts take longer. The other parts did take longer. I had not spoken to Sloane since the cookout. She had called twice in the weeks after Carter's visit. Once the same evening, once 3 days later. I looked at the screen both times and let it ring and set the phone face down. She left no voicemails. She sent no texts. After the second call, she stopped. And the silence from her end had a different quality than the silence I'd maintained. Mine was a decision. Hers felt like something had run out. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the story isn't served by me pretending I was composed and certain about everything from the beginning. What I actually felt was a complicated nothing. The flatness that comes not from not caring, but from having cared so much, for so long, that the caring had exhausted itself, and hadn't yet been replaced by anything else. I had loved my sister once. I want to say that plainly because it's true, and because it's the thing that makes everything else heavier than it would otherwise be. When we were small, before the room, before the desk lamp, before the years of selfish and warm, and the one who does her own thing. She had been my sister in the simple way siblings are siblings, before family dynamics calcify into systems. I remembered being 5 years old and sick with a fever, and Sloane, 9 years old, sitting at the edge of my bed and reading to me from a picture book for 45 minutes, even though she was bad at reading aloud and knew it. That girl was real. She had existed. Whatever had happened to her since, whatever combination of my mother's favoritism and her own choices and the particular distortion that comes from being loved in ways that teach you the world owes you, it didn't erase the girl who sat at the edge of my bed with that book. It also didn't make what she'd done forgivable. Both things were true. I was learning to hold them without needing to resolve them into something cleaner. What I was not prepared for was the conversation with my cousin Becca. Becca is 34, Patricia's older daughter, and she occupies the particular family role of the person who notices things and doesn't say them. A harder position than it looks, one that requires its own kind of discipline. She texted me in September asking if I wanted coffee. I said yes. We met near her office on a Thursday afternoon and spent the first 20 minutes talking about ordinary things. Then she set down her cup and said, I have to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to feel about it. I said, tell me. I knew, she said. Not about the lien. I didn't know that. But I knew Sloane had been calling around before the cookout. I knew what the plan was. And I came anyway and sat at that table and didn't say anything. She said it straight. No performance, no excessive emotion, just the fact, laid flat on the table between us. Why? I said. Because I've been watching this dynamic my whole life and I've never said anything. Because Aunt Judith is my mother's sister. Because it was easier, she paused. That's the honest answer. It was easier not to be the one who made it complicated. I sat with that. The thing about Becca's confession was that it complicated the story I'd been telling myself. The one where the problem was Sloane and my mother and what they had done. That story was true. But Becca's version added something. Systems like this don't run only on the energy of the people at the center. They run on the silence of everyone around them. The cousins who look at their plates. The aunts who say it's just a house, honey and mean it kindly and move on. The people who notice and say nothing because it has always been easier not to. I wasn't angry at Becca. What I felt was something closer to tired, and underneath the tired, something that might eventually become useful. I appreciate you telling me, I said. That's not forgiveness, she said. No, I agreed. It's not. She nodded. like she had expected that answer and was prepared to live with it. We finished our coffee. When we hugged goodbye outside, it was real. Not the performed warmth of people performing family, but the actual warmth of two people who have been honest with each other and are still standing there afterward. I drove home thinking about silence, about how much work it does, how little it costs in the moment, and how much it compounds over time. And I thought about myself. About 31 years of my own silence. The silence that was supposed to be dignity. The silence that was supposed to mean I was above it all. The silence I had dressed up as patience and called a strategy. The receipts had spoken eventually. The truth had been in the room when it mattered, just as my grandmother had promised. But I had also spent 31 years being legible only to myself. And to Eleanor, and to Carter Aldridge, who had known my grandmother for 20 years and understood from the moment I placed that craft envelope on his desk exactly who I was and what it had cost her. There is a version of this story where I say, the silence was worth it, the patience paid off, trust the receipts. I believe that. I do. But I also believe, and I believe this more with every Wednesday call and every cup of coffee with Becca and every Tuesday morning, that the people who love us should not require a forensic document examiner to figure out who we are, that the truth should not have to wait for a probate court, that being the one who stays should not mean being the one who disappears. I am still learning to take up the right amount of space. After 31 years of practice in the other direction, it does not come naturally. I catch myself minimizing, softening the edges of what I mean so it lands easier for whoever's listening. But I also catch myself stopping. I went back to Tahoe in November, the second time since the estate closed. I brought Nora. We stayed for a weekend, and she made coffee in the kitchen on Saturday morning, and I showed her the dock, and we sat out there in jackets because the temperature had dropped, and neither of us cared. She looked out at the water for a while. Then she said, I get it now, why you kept coming back. I looked at the lake. November Tahoe is a different creature than summer Tahoe. Quieter, stripped of the tourist season and the boat traffic, the noise of people treating it like a backdrop. In November it just exists. It doesn't perform. She used to say it knew the truth about people, I said. Nora considered that. What do you think she meant? I had thought about this since finding the letter. I'd held it up against different lights. I think she meant you can't perform for a place, I said. People, you can manage people. You can be what they need or what they expect, or what's easiest for the room. But a place just receives you. It doesn't respond to what you perform. It only knows what you actually are when you're standing in it. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, she knew you'd understand that. Eventually, I said. She left you the place where you can't pretend, Nora said. I hadn't thought about it in exactly those words before, but she was right. That was what the house was. Not just a financial asset, not just a set of memories, but the one place in my life where I had always been received as I actually was, rather than as the story the family needed me to be. She had given me the place where the truth lived. She had also given me the letter and the promissory note, and Carter Aldridge, and 24 years of Tuesday mornings and fishing rods. And you're the one who stays set on a dock before I was old enough to understand what staying cost. Nora went inside to get more coffee. I could hear her in the kitchen. The specific sound of the cabinet where Eleanor kept the mugs, the one that sticks slightly and has to be lifted before it opens. Nora had figured it out on her first try, without being told. The way you figure out the logic of a house that has its own language. I put my hand flat on the dock plank with the small depression in it. The place where she used to set her tackle box, every time, every visit, for as many years as I could remember. Still there, cold wood, November air, the lake perfectly still. I thought about the word selfish, how long I'd carried it, how many times I'd turned it over, how many things I'd done or not done or held back or given away, trying to prove it wasn't true. 3 years of weekends, $47,000. Every prescription bottle, and every waiting room, and every Tuesday morning I would have rather been somewhere else, but wasn't, because she needed me, and I was the one who stayed. I didn't do those things to win an argument. I did them because she was my grandmother, and I loved her, and staying was what love looked like when the circumstances were hard, and nobody was watching. but the word had followed me anyway. All the way to a picnic table with 53 witnesses and a cap-off pen and a document someone had paid to have drafted weeks in advance. And I had put the pen down. Not because I was strategic, not because I had calculated the outcome, because there was a craft envelope in a fireproof box and an attorney who had known my grandmother for 20 years, and a truth that had been quietly, patiently waiting for the room where it mattered. Selfish. 22 years. I was done turning it over. The receipts speak for themselves. I looked out at the lake. The light was shifting the way it does in late afternoon in November, going from gold to something softer and less certain, the kind of light that doesn't ask you to be anything specific. It just holds whatever is in it. My grandmother had said, "This house knows the truth about people." She had been right. She was almost always right. It had taken me a long time, and a fireproof box, and a notary, and a forensic document examiner, and a man named Carter Aldridge in a gray suit. But I finally understood what she had seen in me when I was 7 years old on this same dock, and couldn't see it in myself. I was the one who stayed. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Not because I didn't know how to leave. Because staying, when it costs something real, when there's no applause for it, when the family story will call you selfish for it anyway. That is the one thing I have always known how to do. I kept my hand on the wood. The lake held the sky. Grandma was right. This house knew the truth. And now, so does everyone else. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else took the credit, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it with them. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing someone else has been there and stayed anyway,